Welcome to another episode of Foresight TV. I am here with Larry Cohen today. He is one of the true veterans. He's seen it all. He knows it all. I'm actually going to tell this story, Larry, before we get started with the intro. When I was just starting Foresight, you've heard me tell this story before. You were one of the people who really made a huge difference. You probably didn't even recognize it at the time, but I didn't know anybody. I was at a NIC conference, and you were on a panel. I had a question I needed to ask, but I had one appointment the whole NIC, and it happened to be halfway through that, so I had to leave. I ran into you in the hallway. I stopped you, and we started talking, and I'd asked you the question. You asked me what I did, and I was telling you about the company Vigil that I was working for. And I said, I run this log. And you went, oh, yeah, I read that every day on the train. And you brought it out and showed me on the phone.
I remember the conversation. I mentioned the first cup of coffee. I remember the first cup of coffee. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, it was so encouraging. But before we get going, I've got a couple of pieces of business I got to do, and we're going to start with this. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. So I'm going to start by saying thanks to KARE. KARE makes sure this Foresight TV stays on the air week to week, where we get to talk to amazing leaders like Larry. They are passionate about senior living. They're particularly passionate about making sure you have enough staff in your buildings at all times. And they know that sometimes there are places where you just run short, and they provide temporary staffing, great temporary staffing at a price that is reasonable, rather than you paying an arm and a leg and your firstborn child to an agency. So I can't imagine anybody's not using them, but in case you're not, or in case you're struggling with it and you just sort of forgotten about KARE, you should check out KARE. They can give you great people at a reasonable cost. I still think back to one of the companies that used them to replace their entire staff so that they go do a Christmas party during the holiday season. And what a great way to use them. What a great way to take care of people. You will be glad to work with them. Larry, welcome. And you talked about the first cup of coffee. We don't use that as much as we should, and I think we should bring it back. I'm glad you said that. I'm going to work on my team a little bit to make that happen. So let's talk a little bit about who you are, your history, and Trustwell.
Well, sure. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to be on Foresight TV. I've been in the senior living industry longer than most. I'm right now in my 37th year. So my background was trained as an accountant. I'm a CPA, went back to law school, got my law degree, got a master's of law in taxation, was a tax lawyer for two major law firms in Manhattan, and about 5 years of legal practice, an opportunity came along to get involved in real estate. And that then eventually I was involved as the CEO of Payne Weber's real estate company. That was a very large platform. And so in my first life in real estate, we actually built 4 congregate care communities. We didn't call them independent living. There was no assisted living. It was called congregate care. In 1986 and 1987, 2 in Northern California, 2 in Arizona. And then I joined Payne Weber in 1989, and we formed 2 private REITs to finance the acquisition and development of what was then called independent living communities. We built, we financed 13 properties. During the real estate downturn in the 1990s, the sponsor of those properties went bankrupt. We had to find a new operator. We did a search and ended up hiring a company out of Dallas, Texas called Capital Senior Living. And Capital came in and did a fabulous job of turning those buildings around. And then a couple of years later, the founders of Capital asked me if I would join them they were thinking about going public. So I joined Capital Senior Living in 1996. We went public in 1997 and was very proud to lead that company as the CEO for about 20 years until my retirement in 2018. I guess my golf game is just not that good, and retirement wasn't a great fit, and decided to get back into business, and was very fortunate when we relaunched Trustwell in January of 2021 that my team rejoined me. So it was great to bring back my leadership team in operations, sales and marketing, business development, clinical. As we continue to grow Trustwell, we're able to bring back more of our former colleagues. And I say very humbly that I joined an organization in 1996 that had an incredible culture, and I was just lucky enough not to screw it up over 22 years.
Yeah, it's it's leadership is. I think that I love that you're saying that, because I think that most people actually I think most people want to do a good job, and they want to be loyal to their companies, and too often it's the leaders who make it so that that people are less loyal and don't like doing the work. I mean, I guess I think that one of the things I saw, particularly in the last trade show season, was that everybody was talking about how nobody wanted to work in senior living. And I just don't think that's true. And but I also think that if we send this message that nobody wants to work in senior living, then we're going to send that message and people aren't going to like it and aren't going to be proud of it. And I think it's the greatest job in the world. And so I love a leader like you who says, I'm just going to.
And let me tell you something. I'm going to read you an email I received this morning from an exec. I'm very, very involved with our entire company and team. And I received a great email this morning about a community that achieved 100% occupancy. Okay.
Fantastic.
So I sent an email out to our executive director and sales director to congratulate them. And let me see if I can find this email. But it's just how much they love serving the residents and working in this industry. And it's interesting. The other thing that I've really recognized, I do calls every day with our communities. We have set calls with exec directors, sales directors, and I really have gotten probably better insight. I've been doing this for 37 years, and probably get better insight today than I ever have because of my involvement with the local leadership at the community level. And also something that we do at Trustwell since we launched, we do Zoom calls with residents and family members. So
Really?
We've now transitioned 46 buildings. This team has transitioned 128 buildings in the last 25 years or so. And what we do is we actually do Zoom calls in the evening with the families to introduce ourselves, talk about what we plan, and we do Q&A. And the first question and the second question and the third question is, can you get rid of that temporary staff? It's so disorienting to my mother, okay? I mean, we had a call yesterday with a community in Kansas City, and they're getting these tremendous leads and move-ins from competitors. Why? Because of the turnover at the competitive properties. And the families have just said, enough is enough. We want stability, and they're coming to our communities. So, we talk about, this culture and the philosophy that I and my team, and I learned this from my former partner and chief operating officer I worked with so long at Capital Senior Living. It's all about the local leadership. And our philosophy is to empower that team, especially the executive director, with the autonomy and the responsibility, but also the accountability. And that is a critical factor. And if people are comfortable in that type of environment, and having an organization where we feel that the corporate role is to provide the best support, teams, and systems to let people succeed, then people are happy working at Trustwell Living.
I love this. I love this. And I think that having low, I mean, obviously there are some corporate level things that have to be consistent, things like CRMs and accounting systems and some legal kinds of things. But the markets are so different and leadership styles are so different at the local level. One of the things that I'm always struck by is the difference in personalities in really really successful companies. One of my favorites outside senior living is a guy by the name of Gary Ridge, who until very recently ran the company WD-40, and it's ranked as one of the best companies in the whole world to work for. And I've had I've had him on Foresight TV. I've had conversations with him, and he's just this real quiet guy, but he loves people. And then you've got James Ree, who's going to be speaking at Argentum in a couple of weeks, who turned around this women's clothing store, and his thing is love plus math, and very, very different personality. And if you tried to make both of them, either one of those, be CEOs like the other, they would be failures. And so how do you have the courage to do that? That's my question.
As far as the courage to do what?
To relinquish that level of control. I think the problem
I'll tell you why. It's a great question. So, first of all, we have to make good hires, and we have to have great training. So, as I said, I'm very fortunate that I have a team. Collaboratively, we've worked together, I think 200 years combined. Okay. Wow. That's a lot. And we're very collegial and very open and very communicative. So that type of culture, it's interesting. It's accountability. So it's a number of different resources. Number one, numbers. I've always known my numbers. And I've always been very fixated on having good information and good data, because numbers don't lie. People might, but numbers don't lie. Okay.
That is true.
So it's like, you know what? So when you have good numbers and you're informed, you can see what's going on. So that's very important. And we do hold people accountable. So, we are fortunate that we're able to attract and retain, both at the regional level and at the community level, strong leaders with good skills who are very passionate about serving seniors, but are willing to be accountable. And It's interesting when we see things not particularly going as planned, we'll write up performance improvement plans, and we'll set out goals and strategies to help that person succeed in whatever role that might be. Very often, the next day, they resign because they don't want to be held accountable or told. On the other hand, there are a lot of leaders that will thrive, and they appreciate the constructive criticism or remarks to help them better themselves. So I think we do a very good job of being very disciplined in our hiring processes. Again, we've taken over 46 buildings, and in many cases, we have retained the staff that was there, and they do a great job. In other cases, we change. But I think the best compliment I've received is when we take over a community and the former executive director, the former health services director, the former CRD comes back to work for us because they hear the positive vibe about what's Trustwell Living. And they're so happy to be back home. I mean, I was on a phone today with a sales director who rejoined this community, and she's touring someone that toured this building a few years ago when it was under the former operator.
Yeah, and this is such an important. I think it's such an important lesson, Larry, because the how the building feels to prospects is absolutely critical, and it's almost all staff that does that, and that comes from the very top and the culture you created. So this is just you're warming my heart here. I got to tell you. So I let's actually take a little bit of a trip back in time. You've already talked sort of about your history, but how have you seen? I mean, sort of. I'm going to do this as a single question. How have you seen senior living evolve over the last 30 years and change? What have we gotten right? What maybe have we not gotten right? And what do you think the future looks like?
Great question. So, if I think back to this industry, as I said, we went public in 1997. We were the second to last company to go public. So between 1994 and 1998, there were about 12 or 13 companies went public. And by 2000, only a handful were survivors. And so what happened back then is there was this great demographic story. You may have, familiar with Age Wave, Ken Dykewald, right?
Yep.
And Ken Dykewald back then was writing books about, if you want to go to look at where's the money, all this cruises and hospitality, it was the senior. But again, that was a 65 and older age cohort. Yep. So this industry started, I mentioned congregate living, independent living. It was combining hospitality with living, with apartments and meals in a carefree lifestyle. And that's kind of the evolution or the start of this industry. Assisted living really evolved in the 1990s. Probably Paul Clausen at Sunrise was probably the one that understood best. He had this Dutch model of looking at the adult children and understanding the need for having the assistance with the with activities of daily living. And so, you go back, there was all this capital raised in the 1990s for supply. And everybody was talking a demographic story 25 years ahead of the demographic curve. So, so we had all the supply come up, sounded great, had this age wave, and unfortunately, the industry imploded because it was overbuilt. So by 1999, all the shovels were no longer in the ground. Development sites were canceled, and we all focused on survival and filling buildings through 2004, 2005. We hit a cycle then where there was some balance in supply. We worked through the oversupply, and things were progressing. And then we hit the Great Recession, which was a housing downturn that definitely impacted particularly independent living, because all of a sudden the home values were down, or seniors couldn't sell their homes and didn't want to move into independent living or senior housing communities. We actually evolved during that time frame by converting units from independent living to assisted living to become more need driven, because we recognized that people couldn't wait if they needed the assisted living. But if it was more discretionary, they could wait until the housing market recovered. Right. And from 2011 to 2015, this industry was on very solid footing. We saw great growth coming out of the Great Recession. We always did a very good job on expense management. We actually came out of the Great Recession with higher margins and better cash flow than we did going in, because we were able to compensate for occupancy loss through expense savings. And then everyone started to focus on this real demographic curve that was growing 2020 beyond. So we started to see more supply. So 2016 to 2020, we saw overbuilding again. We saw the pressures on the industry. And then obviously COVID hit in March of 2020. That had a devastating impact on the industry. And it's now 2024, And we are seeing a recovery, but we have not yet, as an industry, recovered from the pandemic. It's probably at least another year out before we get to those levels. But now we're finally, which is, I think, very promising and positive, we finally have really good fundamentals. We have this growth of the 80 plus cohort, growing by 1 million seniors over the next few years, 2 million seniors the following 2-3 years. We see a very, very steep slowdown in supply. A lot of it's capital constrained. So, we're finally at a point now where we're seeing growth in demand. You see record absorption level. There's still this supply out there, both units that haven't filled since the pandemic and, some supply. But I think we're at a point where we're seeing the growth of demand doubling the growth of supply for years to come. And again, everything seems to be like a 5-year cycle. I go back to 1999 for the first overbuilding, recovery by 2004. We see the Great Recession, 2008 to 2010, recovery through 2015. We see COVID, recovery 2025 and 26. So I think we're at that period still recovering, but I think that recovery will accelerate and hopefully exceed where we were pre-pandemic over the next couple of years.
So I see a couple of things happening. So coming out of sort of 2008, which is around the time I started doing this, a little later than that, there were a bunch of new companies that formed, and a lot of them look like rocket scientists in terms of operations, because there was so much pent up demand, and it turned out to not be true, which I think sort of dragged everything down. One of the things I'm seeing right now, and I'd love to, maybe you're not seeing the same thing, but it seems like more so than any time since I've been writing and talking about the industry, we're seeing a bifurcation of operators who are actually doing really, really well. You talked about having a building that's 100%. I hear that from a handful of operators. And then there are people out there who continue to just really, really struggle. And that much more, it's not quite haves and have nots, but two big buckets of people who are really successful and people who are not. And of course, there are some in the middle. Are you seeing the same thing? And do you have any thoughts on that?
And we see it within markets. It's interesting. So look, not every market can be successful, right? I mean, this is a business that you're looking at a 7-10 mile trade radius. Typically, you have to have the right demographics, you have the right income levels, wealth, home values. So there's an economic factor of whether seniors can be qualified to live in senior housing. So that is important as we think about the local market. And then within the market, we talk about supply, demand. Obviously, we're seeing much less new supply, so that's become much better in balance. But as I remarked a few minutes ago, we're getting residents from competitors because of all the turnover in the buildings. So of staff, or the fact that so much contract labor. I mean, I'm very proud of our team. We've transitioned 46 buildings over the last 2 years since we launched Trustwell. And I would say in almost every building, we have reduced contract labor by 80% in the first 90 days. We have done a great job of filling open positions, bringing in new leadership. We have state-of-the-art systems and technology. So we're using systems to be able to allow the staff to have more free time to deal with residents and families and care for the plan. We have a fabulous clinical team, and they attract great nurses and staff. So, it's the quality of care. The other thing that's very interesting is activities. A lot of prospects will come in to visit our buildings, and I have a great review from a daughter of a mother who moved into memory care.
I want to hear it.
And it's a long review, but I'll just highlight a few paragraphs. It's approaching a month. I'm delighted with the experience. Mom is a different person. She's got some of her old magic back. and she talks about her search. And she says that there seems to be a strong personal connection between among staff and residents. It's like a family. Trustwell Living's tagline is family caring for family. The activities are amazing. Other facilities had activities, but the choices seem to be more something mom, where our community, something more mom would get into. She said she thought she passively watched some activities, but she jumps right in. Indeed, the activities were a definite swing factor in our choice of Rock Run. We want to maximize mom's life. And then she gives her how great, she actually did her research by speaking to people in the medical community. She visited facilities. She spoke to physical therapists, hospice nurses to help direct where her mother should move into. And she said the secret sauce at any memory care is the staff. And she names the stars. And this is from a family of apartment with her name, Way to Go team, with 4 exclamation points and a smiley face.
Man, I love that. I love that. I love that. So I've got about 3 minutes here. And I have 2 more topics we haven't really, you sort of touched on one. So let me tell you what they both are. And I'm going to let you pick one because I don't think we can do both. One is, how do you create a programming for the upcoming boomers, which is kind of you and me, right? And the second question is technology. What are you using? What do you like? What do you wish were out there that's not there?
Great
And you
question.
get to
So I'll try to hit both quickly. Technology, again, we started with a clean slate. So we spent a year before we even took over our first property to manage. We bought buildings in 2022. And what's important is having technology. So we have, our CRM, our electronic health records, EMR, again, using technology to free up time for the clinical and on-site staff. We want technology that's integrated, that's automated, so we're comfortable that we have good data. We use that data for dashboards and be able to manage the business using that as those KPIs as tools to measure performance and make changes to improve performance. So, but again, it has to be something that is easily adapted with good training, good service to the on-site staff, that they can use it well and feel comfortable using it. So I think that's critical on technology. This is a high-touch business, not a high-tech business, but technology can free up the time and automate processes to allow the staff to have more time with the residents and caring for our residents and families. And then I think this daughter touched upon it, activities and food. I mean, we do resident satisfaction surveys, and it's always been about the food. It's very, very important part of the day. It's the highlight of the day for the residents, and activities. And it's interesting where we hear from prospects, they walk into a building and it's depressing. They don't see any activities. You walk in and you see residents sleeping on the front porch, right? It's
Yeah.
not, right? So I think that those are the kind of the 2 highlights of what's so important to have a really good experience. We have a very well-known person in this industry that is a great marketer, does her own blog. Her grandfather happened to be a resident in our building, and she just raves about how happy he is. We just actually changed the food vendor and food service there, and she was so complimentary. So, that to me, those are the 2 critical paths, and care for sure, having really good quality care and stability of the leadership team and the staff at the building.
Yeah, well, I'm ready to quit my job and come to work for you now. So if you're looking for, and this is really important, right? If you are somebody who's working in an organization, I mean, I don't know what openings you have, but if you really want to go to a place where you're going to make a difference and love going to work, you need to be working for a company like Trustwell. You need to be working for a leader like Larry, because you'll be able to better change the world. and you'll have a better, happier life. So I appreciate your time, your wisdom. We are about out of time. So I appreciate that. Just hang on for 1 second after we're done. Jada has put up his contact information. You can find them at Trustwell, their website, or you can also find Larry on LinkedIn. Again, thank you so much for your support and your wisdom and your passion for this industry.
Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate all that you do as well.